The Black Plague is a lot darker than you thought and way more gruesome than they teach in school. People literally died within 24 hours of getting their first symptom. There was a story of a man who got his first symptoms and then he started writing his own will with a notary and a witness, but he died in the middle of writing it, and then the witness and a notary also died that day. Number two, there was actually 3 different types of the Black Plague. There was the bubonic plague, which was the most common, and it had a 30 to 60% survival rate. There was the pneumonic, which spread way faster and was way deadlier, and it had a 10 to 40% survival rate. And then there was the septemic, which had a 0% survival rate basically. Number 3, it literally wiped out a third of Europe's population. They estimate between 20 to 200 million people died from the Black Plague, making it the second deadliest world event behind World War II. And number 4, people literally abandoned their family members who got infected and just left the house and would lock them inside and put a black X on their door. Number 5, some of the symptoms included swollen lymph nodes the size of eggs or apples that would have a black ring and be filled with pus and sometimes ooze or explode. That's one way that the Black Plague was being spread. Other people literally started rotting from the inside out. Their organs would start to break down and they would get black spots on their skin that people called God's tokens, basically saying that God's calling you home. Other people would start coughing up blood, extreme weakness, chills, tremors. And number 6, the plague spread through infected rats and fleas. So they actually tracked that the rats came from Asia on ships through the trading routes. And number 7, whole towns would be wiped out overnight. In places like Venice, Italy, there was over 600 people dying per day at one point. I think it's way more gruesome than that, so if you guys want a part 2, let me know. The Black Plague is a lot darker than
Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Harakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone that rule well, and peace and salutations to the elect of Yasharallah. I'm going to do a quick lesson on this topic, man, on this TikTok, about the Black Plague, the bubonic plague and whatnot. Which it happened obviously in the medieval times of Europe, and we all know that a big portion, the beginning at least of the medieval times, the Dark Ages, was Europe being ruled, populated by the Southern Kingdom, which are the Jews of the Israelites, of the Lord's people, okay? So, which were dark-skinned, colored people, okay? All right, I have to make that point, And yes, there was fair-skinned Edomites, and Israelites living there too, but it was majority the Jews, for a good portion of the Dark Ages, the medieval times, man. All right, and the Black Plague is, the elders, like Malcolm, the elder Malcolm, he be going into the history, man, of these times, all right, and the elders be saying, the bubonic plague, the Black Plague, is what really, destroyed Jake, in these times, man, all right, really weakened the Jews, the tribe of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, which were dwelling in Europe at that time, really weakened them. And a lot of Jake died, All right, this guy said 1/3 of the population of Europe died, which is a lot of people, and most of that was Israelites, all right, and which, like I said, really weakened the Jews, and the Moors, which were the same people, really, all right, living in Europe at that time, and, gave Esau, the so-called white man, all right, coming out of the Caucasus Mountains, gave him a leg up on overtaking, Europe, and ruling Europe, all right, and marrying into the royal families and whatnot, and overtaking and ruling Europe, and and getting a leg up on Jake, and eventually conquering Europe, all right, and flushing out, all right, the Jews, all right, the Lord's people, all right, out of Europe, the so-called black people out of Europe, okay, all right, the Spanish Inquisition, happened at, and that after this, and that's what, the Spanish Inquisition was really the Edomites taking over Spain, all right, over from the Jews and the Moors, and converting them into Christianity, and really just, whitewashing Spain, kicking out or just unaliving, Jake, in Spain, all right. Because Spain used to be ruled by black people, all right, before the white man came out of the Caucasus Mountains and ruled Europe, all right. And I just had to make that point, but this guy made some key points in this video, about 1/3 of the population died. Remember, 1/3, all right, of the population died, and how it was, very great death, one of the worst times in human history, whole villages, whole towns, died, Just like he said, in Italy, somewhere in Italy, 600 people were dying a day. Just imagine that. 600 people around you in a city that you're living in dying each and every day. Okay? That is crazy. People, a family member, would get sick in a household, and, they would just run away, lock them up in that house, board the house, lock them up in there, and paint the house with a black X. Just imagine that. Horrible times, man. That Europe faced during that time, man. Because of a disease, a pestilence, a plague. Okay? And I made that point out. I made that point too because, hey, that same plague, all right, the same diseases and more are going to come to America. Great pestilence, diseases, plagues is coming to America eventually here soon, man. Well, we all seen 2020, all right? What happened during the year 2020? A pandemic, COVID -19, okay? That happened, and people were freaking out, and that was a fake one, it wasn't really fake, there was actually a disease being pushed out, but it wasn't as great as this, the Black Plague, bubonic plague. He was naming like 3 different types, that was real. But C19, that was nothing, and people were freaking out, the whole earth was shaking, over a common cold, It was really a bad flu, because I had it. It was just a really shitty flu, I had the swine flu. The swine flu was worse than that, C19 wasn't nothing. It sucked though. It was nothing. It just felt like a really bad flu, and that's it. I didn't take no VAX, no jump shot, because I knew, I'm just gonna eat the herbs, eat healthy, fast, pray to the Lord, and the Lord's gonna He's got me, and He healed me from it. I wasn't even tripping, man. I was just pissed that I got sick. That's it. But America here during Jacob's trouble. Let me get it. All right. Matthew 24:21 says, "For then shall be great tribulation. Okay, talk about in these times that we're stepping into. Okay. All right. It says, For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of this world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. All right. Okay. So yeah, it's talking about Jacob's trouble. Okay. Jacob's trouble, which is the times that we're entering into before the Lord returns. All right. It's going to be a time that the world has never seen before, and it's not going to be a good time. It's going to be the worst times. Okay. All right. Jeremiah 30:7, it says, Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. Okay. Let's lock it. Give me a moment. I'm going to read Jeremiah 30:5. It says, For thus saith the Lord, we have heard a voice of trembling, of fear, and not peace. Ask ye now, and see whether a man doth travail with child. Wherefore do I see every man with his hands on his loins as a woman in travail, and all faces turned into paleness. Alas, that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, for he shall be saved out of it. Okay? All right? And this is the times that we're entering to. All right? The worst times that, ever imaginable. Just imagine the worst times that have ever happened in human history. That won't compare to the times that we're about to enter into, man. The times before the Lord returns. Okay? And it's going to be great pestilence, great disease, great plagues, great famines, great unalivings, great death, okay, great suffering, great horrible, destructive, deadly weather events, okay. You name it, man. All right. That's what's coming to this earth, okay. And the topic of this lesson is going to be about, the pestilence, the diseases. That's why I brought out that TikTok, showing the magnitude and how great that disease, that pestilence was in that time. And it's going to be worse. All right. There's going to be pestilence, plagues. That's going to be even worse than that. That's going to come upon America and the world. Okay. In these times that we're stepping into. Okay. So I want to get this. 2 Ezra 15:11, it says, But I will bring them with a mighty hand and a stretched out arm, and smite Egypt with plagues. All right, with plagues as before, and will destroy all the land thereof. This is not talking about modern day Egypt. What is modern day Egypt? Okay. It's not talking about that land over there in Northeast Africa. No. Modern day Egypt, according to the Bible, is a spiritual place. It's a physical place, but it's spiritually called Sodom and Egypt. And it's talking about Babylon the Great, the virgin daughter of Babylon, which is America. America fits the description of spiritual Sodom and Egypt and the virgin daughter of Babylon. And the Lord, right here in 2 Ezra 15:11, says he's going to plague it with plagues as he did with Egypt before in the ancient times, and will destroy all the land thereof. And the Lord smited, struck Egypt with multiple plagues, diseases, okay, when he saved and delivered his people out of that land, okay. And he's going to do that same thing again, and greater and worse, to this place. Okay? So imagine the bubonic plague. All right? The plagues that happened in Egypt, but worse. Okay? Here's this one. Ezekiel 5:12. It says, this is speaking about our people, the wicked of our people, the 2/3 of the nation of Israel, the wicked of our people, which are going to be taken away by these plagues. Okay? It says, a third part of thee shall die with pestilence. Pestilence is diseases, okay? Sicknesses, okay? And remember what that dude said, He said a third part, all right? Third of the population of what? Of Europe. And who was ruling in Europe at that time? Majority was black people. The Israelites, the southern kingdom, okay, was ruling Europe at this time. And it said a third part fell, died. Third part of the population of Europe died because of the plague. And what does this scripture say? It says, a third part of thee shall die with the pestilence, and with famine shall they be consumed in the midst of thee. And there was a lot of famines going on around that time, man. Okay, as well, And with famine shall they be consumed in the midst of thee, and a third part shall fall by the sword round about thee. What happened after that, man? All right, the Edomites, the so-called white man, came out of the Caucasus Mountains, all right, with this sword, his killing instrument, his blessing, and slayed a lot, killed a lot, unalived a lot of Jakes, so-called black people, the Israelites, the Jews, at that time. And he took over Europe, okay? And converted all of Europe into Christianity, all right? Because Jake was, Jake was, doing all types of wickedness, being Muslim, being Roman Catholicism, being Roman Catholics, worshiping the Virgin Mary, being Levitical priest, disregarding, the Lord, Jake was ruling, and the earth was at peace for roughly 1,000 years, at that time, because Esau was in the Caucasus Mountains, but our people were doing wickedness, So the Lord, ended that 1,000 years of peace of the world and let loose, this devil, out of the Caucasus Mountains. And what came with him? Death, pestilence, unaliving, the sword. All right, and he took over Europe and eventually took over the world again for this last revitalized Roman Empire rule over the Israelites. Okay, and it's almost over. The Lord's about to return here soon and establish the kingdom of heaven. Like the scriptures say, that little horn shall be let loose for a little season. The devil shall be let loose for a little season after that 1,000 years. That's what that 1,000 years was talking about, the Dark Ages. All right, the white man was not ruling Europe. He was in the Caucasus Mountains, and the black people, Jake, the Israelites, were ruling. The southern kingdom was ruling Europe. All right. And then the northern kingdom was already over here in the Americas. Okay, that's what that's that 1,000 years of peace. Okay. It says, and a third part shall fall by the sword round about thee, and I will scatter a third part into all the winds. All right, because our people were scattered throughout the whole world: Europe, America, South America, Africa, Asia. All right, the Middle East, everywhere, throughout the islands, Australia, everywhere, man. All right, and I will draw out a sword after them. Okay, so the Lord will send. He has sent this Edomite after our people, man. Okay. by way of pestilence as well, because that's the topic of this lesson. All right, because this devil Esau Edom, he also, he doesn't just use that physical sword. He uses pestilence as a sword too. All right, he's got these labs. Now he has these labs, and he could conjure up. How do you say it? He could make his own diseases and pestilence. And use them as a sword. All right, by way of VAXs, jump shots. All right, shots. In people's arms, syringes. Okay, and saying it's good for you when it's really a disease. That's why I don't trust needles. I don't trust syringes. Because they don't have to tell you what's in it. Jeremiah 28:8 says, the prophets that have been before thee, like that have been before me and before thee of old, prophesied both against many countries and against great kingdoms of war and of evil and of pestilence. Okay, and we're telling you that the plagues of Europe that happened in the medieval times, in the Dark Ages, all right, they're going to come back on the earth again, all right, here very soon, okay? Because that's what happens before, that's what happens when a great kingdom and empire falls, and for one to rise again, pestilence, disease, okay? That's one way the Lord destroys and takes down and humbles and breaks down a kingdom, an empire, is by way of disease, pestilence, plagues, okay? All right, Matthew 24:7, this is talking about these end times that we're in right now, okay? Jacob's trouble. It says, for nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in diverse places. Okay? And we're seeing that, man. Earthquakes in diverse places, famines, all right? It's going to get worse and worse, They come and go, but, it gets worse and worse, man. And ultimately, the pestilences, okay? And the Lord's going to let it all loose here very soon during Jacob's trouble, man, when all hell breaks loose. All right? 2020 was just a birth pain, a spiritual birth pain upon the earth. All right? Those birth pains, they come in waves, and they get worse and worse and worse before the son, all right, is birthed, comes out.